Camping with friends is one of the best ways to unwind. After a long week filled with deadlines and responsibilities, I was ready for a break from the chaos of everyday life. So when autumn rolled around, my friends and I decided to go camping in the woods. We packed our gear, loaded up the car, and headed out to a cozy campsite surrounded by tall trees and colorful fall leaves. When we arrived, the air was crisp and refreshing. The smell of pine filled my lungs as we set up our tents in a nice clearing. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, the flames flickering and casting warm light on our faces. The crackling fire created a cozy atmosphere, perfect for sharing stories. Our group was made up of 5 friends: Alex, Jamie, Mia, Ryan, and me. Alex was always the one to take charge of storytelling. He loved to spin tales that sent shivers down our spines. Jamie, our resident skeptic, often rolled his eyes at ghost stories. He had a logical mind and preferred to dismiss anything that couldn't be explained. Mia was easily frightened, her imagination running wild with every shadow. Ryan was the calm one, often trying to soothe Mia when she got too anxious. As the fire crackled and the shadows danced, Alex leaned in closer, ready to tell his tale. He spoke of a supernatural entity that haunted the woods, a spirit that lured unsuspecting campers into the darkness. His words painted a vivid picture of a ghostly figure that whispered promises of adventure, only to lead its victims to their doom. The story was chilling, and I could feel the tension in the air as Alex described the spirit's glowing eyes and eerie presence. As Alex continued, strange things began to happen around our campsite. A sudden gust of wind blew through the clearing, causing the flames to flicker wildly. The firelight cast long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist, making the trees look like they were reaching for us. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I glanced at Mia, who was now clutching her marshmallow stick tightly. Ryan shot a nervous glance into the woods, clearly unsettled by the growing tension. The more Alex spoke, the more I felt the line between his story and our reality blurring. The sounds of the forest seemed to echo his words, and I could hear rustling in the bushes. I glanced at Jamie, who was trying to laugh it off, but even he looked a bit shaken. Mia was visibly frightened, her face pale as she leaned closer to the fire. As Alex reached the climax of his story, he described how the spirit would call out to campers, using their names to lure them away from safety. Just then, a loud thud echoed from the trees, and we all jumped. Jamie laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Mia looked like she might cry, and I felt my heart racing. The atmosphere had shifted from fun to terrifying in just a few moments. The fire crackled again, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I wanted to believe it was just a story, but the way the forest felt around us made it hard to shake off the fear. The whispers Alex mentioned seemed to fill the air, and I could feel the presence of something lurking just beyond the firelight. Suddenly, the fire dimmed, and the shadows grew darker. I could hear whispers now, faint but clear enough to send chills down my spine. They seemed to echo Alex's story, calling out to us, urging us to come closer. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was supposed to be fun, but now it felt like we were in the middle of a horror movie. In a panic, I stood up, urging everyone to pack their things. But as I turned to grab my backpack, I heard it, a soft whisper that called my name. I froze, my heart pounding. It felt like the spirit from Alex's tale was right there, watching us. I glanced at Alex, who looked just as startled as I felt. We hurried to gather our belongings, the firelight flickering ominously behind us. The whispers grew louder, and I could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on us. I glanced back, half expecting to see the spirit standing there, but all I saw were the trees swaying in the wind. As we stumbled away from the campsite, the whispers faded, but the fear remained. We hurried down the path, the darkness closing in around us. I could hear rustling leaves and snapping twigs, and I felt like we were being followed. The adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I could barely breathe. Finally, we reached the car, and I fumbled with the keys, my hand shaking. We piled in, slamming the doors shut, and I started the engine. As we drove away, the forest receded behind us, but the memory of that night lingered in the air. We were all shaken, the events of the evening etched into our minds. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. The experience had changed us, forcing us to confront our beliefs about the supernatural and the power of storytelling. We laughed about it later, but deep down, we all knew that something strange had occurred that night. The line between reality and fiction had blurred, and we were left with a sense of unease. Even now, when I think back to that camping trip, I can still feel the chill in the air and hear the whispers of the forest. The campfire tales we shared that night became more than just stories. They became a reminder of the unknown that lurks just beyond the light. I learned that sometimes, the stories we tell can have a life of their own, and the darkness can hold secrets that are best left undiscovered. As we planned our next camping trip, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching us. The thrill of adventure was still there, but it was now mixed with a healthy dose of caution. The experience taught me to respect the power of storytelling and the mysteries of the forest. I may still love camping, but I will always remember that night around the fire, where the line between reality and fiction blurred, leaving us with a haunting tale that would stay with us forever. Camping has always been one of my favorite ways to escape the chaos of everyday life. After a long week filled with work and responsibilities, I was ready for a break. So when my friends and I decided to go camping in the woods, I was all in. We packed our gear, loaded up the car, and drove out to a remote campsite nestled deep in the forest. The campsite was surrounded by towering trees, their leaves a mix of vibrant oranges, yellows, and reds, signaling the arrival of autumn. The air was crisp and refreshing, filled with the earthy scent of damp leaves and pine needles. As we set up our tents, I could hear the faint rustling of critters in the underbrush and the distant call of a woodpecker. It felt good to be away from the noise of the city, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of nature. Once our campsite was set up, we gathered around the campfire. The flames crackled and popped, sending sparks into the night sky. We roasted marshmallows and made s'mores, laughing and sharing stories. The warmth of the fire felt comforting against the cool evening air, and the shadows danced around us, creating a cozy yet slightly eerie atmosphere. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest transformed. The darkness enveloped us, and the only light came from our campfire. The sounds of the forest changed too. The chirping of crickets filled the air, and the occasional rustle of leaves made me jump. I loved being outdoors, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were alive with secrets. After a while, Sam, one of my friends who loved adventure, leaned forward, his eyes wide with excitement. He had a knack for storytelling and often led our group into spontaneous adventures. As the firelight flickered, he announced that he had a spooky story to share. The rest of us settled in, eager to listen. Sam began to tell a tale about a mysterious light that appeared in the woods at night. According to his story, this light would flicker and dance among the trees, drawing in curious campers. Those who followed the light often found themselves lost, unable to return to their campsites. The more Sam spoke, the more the atmosphere around us shifted. The fire crackled ominously, and the shadows seemed to stretch further into the darkness. As Sam described the light, I felt a chill run down my spine. The way he painted the picture made it feel real, and I could almost see the flickering glow in my mind. I glanced at Emma, another friend who was sitting next to me. She looked anxious, her eyes darting around as if she expected something to jump out at her. I could tell she was getting spooked. Just as Sam reached the climax of his story, a sudden gust of wind blew through the campsite. The flames flickered wildly, and I felt a shiver run through me. It was as if the forest was responding to Sam's tale. I glanced around, half expecting to see the mysterious light he had described. But there was nothing, just the darkness and the trees standing like silent sentinels. After Sam finished his story, we all fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. I could feel the tension in the air, and I knew I wasn't the only one feeling uneasy. The night was deepening, and the forest felt more alive than ever. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself it was just a story, but the unease lingered. As the fire began to die down, I noticed something strange in the distance. A flickering light appeared among the trees, just like Sam had described. My heart raced as I pointed it out to the others. Sam's eyes lit up with excitement, while Emma's face turned pale. Dave, our resident skeptic, squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The light danced and flickered, moving in a way that seemed almost playful. It was too far away to tell what it was, but it felt out of place in the stillness of the night. My curiosity got the better of me, and I felt a pull to investigate. Sam, always eager for an adventure, stood up and grabbed his flashlight. He was ready to go check it out. Emma looked nervous, her anxiety bubbling to the surface. She didn't want to leave the safety of the campfire, but Sam was already moving toward the light. Dave followed, his skepticism battling with a sense of curiosity. I hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Emma, who was clearly uncomfortable. But the thrill of the unknown was too tempting to resist. As we walked toward the light, the forest felt different. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the night faded into an eerie silence. The only thing I could hear was the crunch of leaves under our feet and the occasional rustle of branches. I shone my flashlight ahead, illuminating the path, but the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, making the trees look even more menacing. The closer we got to the light, the more anxious I felt. It flickered in and out, almost like it was teasing us. I glanced back at Emma, who was still at the campsite, her eyes wide with fear. I felt a pang of guilt for leaving her behind, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the light ahead. As we reached a clearing, the light suddenly vanished. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me, but it was quickly replaced by unease. The clearing was empty, with no sign of life. The ground was covered in leaves, and the trees loomed overhead like silent watchers. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Just then, the temperature dropped, and I shivered. It was as if a cold breeze had swept through the clearing, chilling me to the bone. I glanced at Sam and Dave, who looked just as unsettled as I felt. We stood there for a moment, scanning the area for any sign of what we had just seen. Suddenly, the light flickered back to life, illuminating the clearing for a brief moment. It cast long shadows that danced across the ground, and I could see something moving in the darkness. My heart raced as I realized we were not alone. The light seemed to pulse, drawing us in, but I felt a deep instinct to turn back. Before I could say anything, the light vanished again, leaving us in darkness. The sounds of the forest returned, but they felt different, more menacing. I could hear whispers, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the trees. Panic surged through me as I grabbed Sam's arm, urging him to leave. We turned to head back, but the path felt different. The trees seemed to close in around us, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on us. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking behind us. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. As we stumbled back toward the campsite, I could hear the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs. It felt like we were being followed, and I quickened my pace. Sam and Dave were right behind me, their faces pale with fear. I could see the campfire flickering in the distance, a beacon of safety amidst the darkness. Finally, we burst into the clearing where our campsite was set up. The fire was still burning, but it felt smaller now, almost overwhelmed by the surrounding darkness. Emma looked up, her eyes wide with concern as we rushed back to the safety of the fire. We collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. The atmosphere around the campfire felt different now. The warmth of the flames was comforting, but the fear lingered. We huddled close, sharing nervous glances as we tried to make sense of the experience. What had we seen? Was it just a trick of the light, or was there something supernatural lurking in the woods? As we sat there, the whispers faded, but the sense of unease remained. The flickering light had left us shaken, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness. The night dragged on, and we tried to distract ourselves with stories and laughter, but the tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Eventually, we decided to call it a night. We crawled into our tents, but sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside made me jump, and I lay there wide awake, listening to the forest. The distant calls of animals felt menacing now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious light was still out there, waiting for us. The next morning, we packed up our campsite quickly, eager to leave the unsettling experience behind. As we drove away, I looked back at the trees, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. The woods had held secrets that night, and I knew I would never forget the mysterious light that flickered in the darkness. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about that night more and more. What had caused the light? And where had it gone? I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew there was something more to it. The experience had changed me, making me more cautious about venturing into the unknown. The encounter with the mysterious light left a mark on all of us. We became more aware of the unpredictable nature of the wilderness and the stories that can come alive in the dark. I still love camping, but I approach it with a newfound respect for the woods and the mysteries they hold. That night around the campfire taught me that sometimes the unknown is best left unexplored, and the stories we tell can have a life of their own. As I reflect on that camping trip, I can still feel the chill in the air and hear the whispers of the forest. The flickering light became a haunting memory, a reminder of the eerie and unpredictable nature of the wilderness. I learned that while the outdoors can be a place of beauty and adventure, it can also hold secrets that are best left undiscovered. Now, whenever I go camping, I can't help but glance into the darkness, half expecting to see that mysterious light flickering in the distance. The thrill of adventure is still there, but it's mixed with a healthy dose of caution. I've come to understand that the wilderness is full of surprises, and not all of them are friendly. The experience has made me more respectful of nature and the stories it holds, leaving me with a lingering sense of wonder and wariness whenever I step into the woods. There's a unique tranquility in escaping the daily grind. After a hectic week, I long for a break from the clamor of everyday life. A solo camping trip in the woods seemed like the perfect remedy, just me, nature, and an elusive sense of peace. I packed my gear, loaded up my car, and set off for a weekend of solitude. The campsite I found was tucked away in a dense forest, surrounded by towering trees and thick underbrush. It felt like I was miles away from civilization, which was exactly what I wanted. As I parked my car and hiked a short distance to my campsite, the crisp evening air carried the scent of pine, and the crackling campfire provided a comforting glow against the encroaching darkness. I set up my tent, organized my supplies, and took a moment to breathe in the fresh air, feeling the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. As night fell, the woods transformed. The darkness wrapped around me, and the comforting sounds of nature turned eerie. I crawled into my tent, hoping to get some sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The rustling outside made me uneasy, and I kept waking up, feeling like I was being watched. The next morning, I stepped outside to stretch and enjoy the fresh air. That's when I noticed something strange. There were footprints near my tent, leading into the woods. They were larger than my feet and looked fresh. A chill ran down my spine. Who could be out here? I was supposed to be alone. I tried to brush it off and made breakfast, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I decided to go for a hike to distract myself. I packed some water and snacks and set off down a nearby trail, hoping that being active would help me forget about the footprints. The forest was beautiful, with sunlight streaming through the leaves, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I heard a twig snap or a rustle in the bushes, my heart raced. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking behind the trees. After a couple of hours, I returned to my campsite, feeling more anxious than when I had left. I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. They made me feel vulnerable and uneasy. I decided to check the footprints again, hoping they would provide some answers. As I examined them, I noticed they led deeper into the woods. My curiosity got the better of me, and despite my growing fear, I felt a mix of terror and determination. I had to know what was going on. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the footprints. The deeper I went, the darker it became. The trees towered over me, their branches swaying in the wind, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I pressed on, driven by a need to confront whatever was out there. As I walked, I noticed more signs that someone had been in the area. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, and scraps of fabric caught on the bushes. My heart pounded in my chest as I ventured further. I felt like I was crossing a line, stepping into a territory that didn't belong to me. Eventually, I stumbled upon a hidden camp. It was small and crude, with a makeshift shelter made of branches and leaves. There were remnants of a fire pit and some old, rusty tools scattered around. My heart raced as I took in the scene. This was not just a campsite, it looked like someone had been living here. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I quickly scanned the area for any signs of life. There was no one around, but the unsettling feeling of being watched returned. I noticed a few personal items scattered about: an old backpack, a torn-up blanket, and a small journal. My hands trembled as I picked up the journal, flipping through the pages. The entries were erratic, filled with strange drawings and notes about watching someone in the woods. My stomach dropped as I realized the writer was referring to me. The last entry sent chills down my spine. It mentioned a woman camping alone and how the writer felt a connection to her. It was disturbing and made my skin crawl. I dropped the journal and turned to leave, my heart racing. I needed to get out of there. As I hurried back through the woods, I could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on me. The rustling sounds seemed to grow louder, and I could hear footsteps behind me. I quickened my pace, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I didn't look back, I just ran. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming, and I was terrified. I finally burst out of the trees and back into my campsite, gasping for breath. I slammed the tent flap shut and tried to calm down. My heart was racing, and I could feel the panic rising inside me. I was alone, but I didn't feel safe. The realization that someone had been stalking me, watching me from the shadows, sent me into a spiral of fear. I spent the rest of the day in a state of paranoia. I packed my belongings, ready to leave at a moment's notice. I kept glancing around, expecting to see someone lurking in the trees. The sun began to set, and the darkness crept in again. I felt trapped in my own fear, unable to escape the feeling that I was being watched. As night fell, I crawled into my tent, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that I was just being paranoid. But every sound outside made me jump. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the forest. The distant calls of animals felt menacing now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, waiting for me. Hours passed, and I finally dozed off, only to be jolted awake by a noise outside. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, a rustling sound, followed by a soft thud. My heart raced as I realized I wasn't alone. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent, peeking outside. The darkness was thick, and I couldn't see anything. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I had to get out of there. I quickly packed my things, my hands shaking as I stuffed everything into my backpack. I decided to leave the tent behind. I just needed to get to my car and drive away from this nightmare. As I stepped out into the night, the cold air hit me like a slap. I could hear the rustling again, closer this time. I turned and ran, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted through the trees. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and I was terrified that I would trip and fall. I finally reached my car, fumbling with the keys as I unlocked the door. I jumped inside and locked it, breathing heavily. I started the engine and peeled out of the campsite, my heart racing with every bump in the road. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, where the bright lights felt like a safety net. Once I was safely in a hotel room, I tried to calm down. I reported the incident to the authorities, but they found nothing. No signs of anyone in the woods, no evidence of a stalker. I felt like I was losing my mind. Had it all been in my head? But deep down, I knew what I had experienced was real. The days that followed were a blur. I struggled to shake off the trauma of that night. I found myself questioning my love for solitude and the outdoors. The experience changed me. I became more cautious, more anxious about being alone. The woods that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed like a place of danger. I often thought about that camping trip, about the footprints in the hidden camp. I wondered if I would ever feel safe in the woods again. The encounter with the unknown left a mark on me, a reminder that not all adventures are safe. I learned that sometimes the wilderness holds secrets that are best left undiscovered. In the end, I realized that solitude can be both a blessing and a curse. It can bring peace, but it can also expose you to risks you never expected. The experience taught me to respect the unknown and to be cautious about venturing into isolated places alone. I may still love the outdoors, but I will never forget the lesson I learned that weekend. Growing up, I was always the adventurous type. My family took me camping every summer, and those trips became some of my favorite memories. We'd pack up the car with tents, sleeping bags, and enough snacks to feed an army. I loved everything about it, the fresh air, the crackling campfire, and the thrill of exploring the woods. As I got older, I wanted to recreate those experiences with my friends. So, when the weather turned warm, I suggested a weekend camping trip to a nearby forest. Everyone was excited. It felt like the perfect way to escape our busy lives and reconnect with nature. We planned everything out, mapping out the route and packing all the essentials. I could already picture us sitting around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. The forest we chose was known for its beauty, with tall trees and winding trails. It was a popular spot, but it also had a reputation for being a little eerie, especially at night. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured those stories were just part of the fun. As we drove deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller and thicker, their branches twisting together like bony fingers reaching for the sky. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as we parked and started unloading our gear. The moment we stepped into the forest, a damp, earthy smell hit my nose. The ground was covered in thick fog, making everything look unreal. I could hear the leaves rustling overhead, but it wasn't just the wind. It felt like the forest was alive, whispering secrets to itself. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping up on me, but it was hard to ignore. We set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by huge trees that seemed to lean in closer every minute. Jake, the leader of our group, took charge. He was always so confident and calm, while Lily tried to make us laugh with her jokes. Mark, on the other hand, didn't believe in anything spooky. He laughed off our worries, saying it was all in our heads. I wanted to believe him, but the whispers in the trees made it hard. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire. The flames danced and crackled, casting eerie shadows on the trees. We roasted marshmallows and shared stories, but the atmosphere felt heavy. That's when I first noticed it, the whispering. At first, it was faint, just a rustle in the leaves. But as the night got darker, the sound grew louder and more distinct. It felt like the forest was calling out to us, whispering our names, warning us about something hidden. I tried to focus on my friends, but my heart was racing as I listened. The whispers seemed to get clearer, almost like they were trying to communicate. I glanced at Jake, who was still joking around, but I could see a flicker of unease in his eyes. Lily's laughter sounded forced. Mark's face had turned serious, his skepticism fading as the whispers got louder. I fought against my growing paranoia, telling myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew something was off. The trees felt like they were closing in on us, their branches twisting like fingers ready to grab us. I wanted to speak up, to tell my friends what I was feeling, but I didn't want to ruin the night. I kept my fears to myself, hoping they would go away. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a fog. It was as if the forest was alive, watching us, waiting. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But it was just us, sitting around the fire, surrounded by the whispering woods. Then, without thinking, I suggested we check out where the whispers were coming from. My heart raced as I said it, but curiosity got the better of me. Jake agreed, and the others followed, though I could see the uncertainty in their faces. We grabbed our flashlights and ventured into the darkness, the beam of light cutting through the fog. As we walked deeper into the forest, the whispers grew louder, guiding us further away from the campsite. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The trees loomed over us, their branches swaying in the breeze, almost as if they were trying to warn us to turn back. But we pressed on, the thrill of adventure pushing us forward. Eventually, we stumbled into a clearing. The moonlight shone down, lighting up a strange, old altar in the center. It was made of stones, covered in moss and vines, and it looked ancient. The whispers reached a deafening level, swirling around us like a storm. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. It was as if the forest was alive, and we were trespassing in its sacred space. I wanted to run, but my feet felt stuck to the ground. That's when I realized we weren't alone. I could feel eyes watching us from the shadows, hidden among the trees. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned to my friends, but their faces mirrored my fear. We were all feeling it, the sense that something was wrong, that we had crossed a line we shouldn't have. The whispers turned into frantic murmurs, echoing in my mind. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I wanted to scream, to tell my friends to get out of there, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a pull, an urge to step closer to the altar. It was as if the forest was beckoning me, urging me to uncover its secrets. But then, something shifted. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into a jumble of voices, all clamoring for attention. Panic surged through me, and I finally found my voice. I shouted for everyone to leave, and we turned to run. The whispers followed us, echoing through the trees, growing fainter as we sprinted back to the campsite. We stumbled into the clearing, breathless and wide-eyed. The campfire flickered, casting long shadows that danced around us. We collapsed onto the ground, hearts racing, trying to catch our breath. The whispers had faded, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. As dawn broke, we hurriedly packed our things, the oppressive atmosphere still hanging over us. I glanced back at the woods, half expecting to see something lurking among the trees. The whispers were gone, but the memory of them haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something ancient, something that didn't want us there. The drive home was quiet. Each of us lost in our thoughts, replaying the night's events over and over. I could see the unease in my friends' faces, the way they avoided looking at each other. We had all felt it, the fear, the whispers, the sense of being watched. It was a shared experience that bound us together, but it also left us shaken. In the days that followed, I struggled to shake off the feeling of dread. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind, that the whispers were nothing more than the wind in the leaves. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had faced my fears in those woods, and they had changed me. I found myself questioning everything. Was it just my imagination, or had we really encountered something supernatural? The whispers echoed in my mind, haunting my dreams. I could see the altar in my mind's eye, the way the moonlight had lit it up, the way it had felt so wrong. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened there, what secrets the forest was hiding. As time passed, I became more cautious. I avoided the woods, the memories too fresh and unsettling. I learned to appreciate the safety of civilization, the comfort of being surrounded by people. The experience had opened my eyes to the unknown, to the mysteries that lurked just beyond the familiar. I often thought about that camping trip, about the whispers that had haunted us. I wondered if we were the only ones who had heard them, or if others had ventured into those woods and experienced the same thing. I realized some mysteries are best left unexplored, some secrets better left buried in the depths of the forest. The whispering woods had taught me a lesson I wouldn't soon forget. I had faced my fears, but I had also learned to respect the unknown. The forest was alive, and it held secrets that were not meant for us. I had come away from that trip changed, more aware of the world around me and the mysteries it held. In the end, I learned that some adventures are not just about fun and excitement. They can lead to experiences that shake you to your core, that challenge your understanding of reality. The whispering woods had left their mark on me, a reminder that the unknown is always lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And sometimes, it's best to leave those mysteries untouched. I've always been the adventurous type. Growing up, I spent summers camping with my family, exploring the woods, and making memories around the campfire. Those trips were some of the best times of my life. As I got older, I wanted to share that love for nature with my boyfriend, Max. He's a little more cautious than I am, but he enjoys the outdoors just as much. So, when summer 2023 rolled around, we decided to go on a weekend camping trip to escape our busy lives. We packed up the car with all our gear, tents, sleeping bags, and enough snacks to last us the whole weekend. The drive to the campsite was filled with excitement. The trees grew taller and thicker as we drove deeper into the forest, their branches weaving together like a natural tunnel. I felt a rush of anticipation as we parked the car and stepped out into the fresh air. The smell of pine and earth was invigorating. After a short hike, we found a perfect clearing to set up camp. It was quiet, surrounded by tall trees that made it feel cozy. Max helped me pitch the tent while I laid out our sleeping bags and gathered firewood for later. Everything felt just right, and I couldn't wait to start our adventure. As the sun began to set, we decided to explore the area a bit more. We wandered along a narrow trail, chatting and laughing, when we stumbled upon something unexpected. Hidden among the trees was an abandoned campsite. Old, tattered tents were sagging under the weight of weeds, and a long-extinguished campfire sat in the center, surrounded by stones. It looked like something out of a ghost story. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to check it out. Max hesitated, looking a bit uneasy, but he didn't want to spoil my fun. We walked around the campsite, examining the remnants of what once was. I found a rusty pot and some old, faded camping gear scattered about. It felt strange to be there, like we were intruding on something that should have been left alone. As night fell, we decided to head back to our tent. We built a fire and roasted marshmallows, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. The woods were too quiet, almost as if they were holding their breath. I glanced at Max, who was poking at the fire, his face lit by the flickering flames. He seemed lost in thought, and I could tell he was feeling the same tension I was. Once it got dark, we crawled into our tent, hoping to forget about the abandoned campsite. But as we lay there, trying to fall asleep, we heard it, the disembodied laughter echoing through the trees. At first, it was faint, but it grew louder, bouncing off the trees and sending chills down my spine. I looked at Max, and he looked back at me, eyes wide with fear. The laughter was unsettling, and it seemed to come from all around us. A mix of fear and curiosity washed over me. I wanted to know what was causing the laughter, but I could see that Max was getting more anxious. He urged me to ignore it, to focus on something else, but the sound was persistent. It felt like it was taunting us, drawing us in. I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. I had to know what was going on. I suggested we check it out, but Max was hesitant. He wanted to stay put and wait until morning. I could feel the tension building between us. My curiosity was pushing me to explore, while his growing dread made him want to hide. The weight of the situation pressed down on us, making me anxious. Despite his protests, I convinced Max to come with me. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped out of the tent, the cool night air wrapping around us. The laughter had faded, but I could still feel its presence lingering in the shadows. We walked cautiously, shining our lights into the darkness, searching for any sign of what might be causing the sound. As we moved deeper into the woods, I felt a chill run down my spine. The trees loomed over us, their branches swaying in the wind, casting eerie shadows that danced across the ground. I could hear rustling nearby, and my heart raced. I turned to Max, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He wanted to go back, but I pushed forward, determined to find the source of the laughter. After what felt like an eternity of wandering, we stumbled back upon the abandoned campsite. The moonlight illuminated the area, and I felt a strange pull to explore it further. I walked over to the old campfire, my flashlight beam sweeping across the ground. That's when I noticed something odd, a few personal items scattered around. There were old, worn-out shoes, a faded backpack, and a torn-up blanket. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. I picked up the backpack and opened it. Inside, I found a journal, its pages yellowed and crumpled. I flipped it open, and the words inside sent a shiver down my spine. The entries were cryptic, filled with ramblings about strange noises and shadows moving in the night. One entry mentioned hearing laughter that echoed through the trees, just like what we had heard. My heart raced as I read the words, realizing we weren't the first to experience this eerie phenomenon. Max stood a few feet away, his eyes darting around, clearly uncomfortable. I could see the tension in his body, and I knew he wanted to leave. But I was too far gone, too curious to turn back now. I continued to read the journal, feeling like I was uncovering something important. The last entry was particularly chilling. It spoke of a group that had come to the campsite for a weekend of fun, only to be met with something sinister lurking in the woods. It ended abruptly, leaving me with a sense of dread. Suddenly, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. It was quick, darting between the trees, but I could feel its presence. I turned back to Max, who was now visibly shaken. The laughter started again, louder this time, echoing through the trees. It felt like it was closing in on us. Fear gripped me, and I realized we needed to leave. I dropped the journal and grabbed Max's hand, pulling him away from the campsite. We ran through the woods, the laughter following us, taunting us as we stumbled over roots and rocks. I could feel the cold air wrapping around us, making it hard to breathe. We finally reached our tent, and I dove inside, dragging Max with me. We huddled together, hearts pounding, listening to the laughter fade into the distance. The oppressive silence that followed was almost worse. We lay there, wide awake, the weight of what we had just experienced hanging over us. I could feel Max's body shaking next to me, and I knew we both felt the same sense of dread. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. The forest looked different in the light, less menacing, but still unsettling. We quickly packed our things, not wanting to linger any longer than necessary. I glanced back at the abandoned campsite, feeling a mix of fear and regret. What had we uncovered? What had we disturbed? The drive home was quiet. We were both lost in our thoughts, replaying the night's events over and over. I could see the unease in Max's expression, the way he gripped the steering wheel tightly. We had both felt it, the fear, the laughter, the sense of being watched. It was a shared experience that bound us together, but it also left us shaken. In the days that followed, I struggled to shake off the feeling of dread. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind, that the laughter was nothing more than echoes in the wind. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had faced my fears in those woods, and they had changed me. I found myself questioning everything. Was it just my imagination, or had we really encountered something supernatural? The laughter echoed in my mind, haunting my dreams. I could still picture the abandoned campsite, the journal, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened there, what secrets the forest was hiding. As time passed, I became more cautious. I avoided the woods, the memories too fresh and unsettling. I learned to appreciate the safety of civilization, the comfort of being surrounded by people. The experience had opened my eyes to the unknown, to the mysteries that lurked just beyond the familiar. I often thought about that camping trip, about the laughter that had haunted us. I wondered if we were the only ones who had heard it, or if others had ventured into those woods and experienced the same thing. I realized some mysteries are best left unexplored, some secrets better left buried in the depths of the forest. The forgotten campsite had taught me a lesson I wouldn't soon forget. I had faced my fears, but I had also learned to respect the unknown. The forest was alive, and it held secrets that were not meant for us. I had come away from that trip changed, more aware of the world around me and the mysteries it held. In the end, I learned that some adventures are not just about fun and excitement. They can lead to experiences that shake you to your core, that challenge your understanding of reality. The forgotten campsite had left its mark on me, a reminder that the unknown is always lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And sometimes, it's best to leave those mysteries untouched. Summer vacation had finally arrived, and my family was ready for an adventure. We had planned a camping trip to a picturesque national park, known for its lush, dense woods and towering trees. The park looked like a natural fortress, with its thick foliage and winding trails. My parents, Carlos and Sofia, packed the car with all our camping gear, excited for a week of exploring the outdoors. My younger brother, Diego, and I were buzzing with anticipation, ready to escape our usual routine. When we arrived at the park, the scenery took my breath away. The trees stood tall, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The air was fresh and filled with the earthy scent of pine. We found a serene spot to set up our campsite, nestled among the trees and overlooking a sparkling creek. It seemed perfect, but as we began to unpack, I noticed a strange tension in the air. As we set up our tents, we encountered some locals who were also camping nearby. They were friendly but shared some eerie tales about the forest. They spoke of a mythical creature known as the Guardian del Bosque, a being that protected the woods and its inhabitants. According to them, the Guardian was a large, shadowy figure that roamed the forest at night, watching over the land. My dad, Carlos, dismissed the stories as mere superstition, but I could see my mom, Sofia, growing uneasy. She had always been more open to local legends and seemed to take the warnings to heart. After we finished setting up, we decided to explore the area. The park was beautiful, with trails winding through the trees and wildflowers blooming along the path. As we hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The stories about the Guardian del Bosque echoed in my mind, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once. Diego, who was just a few years younger than me, seemed to sense my unease. He kept close to my side, his eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of fear. That evening, as the sun began to set, we gathered around the campfire. The flames crackled and danced, casting flickering shadows on our faces. We roasted marshmallows and shared stories, trying to shake off the unease that lingered from earlier. But as darkness fell, the atmosphere shifted. The forest became quieter, and the shadows grew deeper. I could hear the wind rustling through the leaves, but there was an unsettling stillness that made me feel like we were being watched. As night settled in, the sounds of the forest changed. The chirping of crickets was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. Just as I was starting to relax, a deep growl echoed from the trees, sending chills down my spine. My heart raced as I looked at my family. Carlos shrugged it off, insisting it was just an animal, but I could see the worry in Sofia's eyes. That night, as we crawled into our tents, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest. The growl from earlier replayed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the firelight. I could hear Diego's soft breathing next to me, but sleep wouldn't come. I felt like I was being watched, and the darkness outside felt almost tangible. The next morning, the sun broke through the trees, casting a warm glow over our campsite. I felt a little better, but the memory of the growl lingered. We decided to go for a hike, hoping to explore more of the park and shake off the strange feeling that had settled over us. As we walked along the trails, I noticed that the locals' tales seemed to hang in the air, making the forest feel both beautiful and foreboding. We followed a winding path that led us deeper into the woods. The trees stood tall and proud, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. I tried to enjoy the beauty around me, but the unease from the night before crept back in. I kept glancing around, half expecting to see the shadowy figure of the Guardian del Bosque lurking behind the trees. As we hiked, we stumbled upon a small clearing. The sunlight poured in, illuminating a patch of wildflowers. It was a beautiful spot, and for a moment, I forgot about my worries. We took a break, sitting on a fallen log and enjoying the peacefulness of the forest. But just as I started to relax, I heard a rustling noise coming from the bushes nearby. My heart raced as I turned to look, but it was just a squirrel darting away. I felt foolish for being so jumpy, but the stories were still fresh in my mind. Later that evening, as we settled back at the campsite, the atmosphere felt tense again. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the shadows grew longer. We gathered around the campfire, trying to keep the mood light. But as the fire crackled, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I noticed Sophia glancing into the trees, her expression worried. I could tell she was still thinking about the stories we had heard. As darkness enveloped us, the forest felt different. The sounds of the night returned, but they felt more ominous. The wind howled through the trees, and the shadows seemed to dance in the firelight. Just when I thought I could relax, I heard that deep growl again, this time closer than before. My heart raced as I exchanged worried looks with my family. Carlos tried to reassure us, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake in my tent, listening to the sounds of the forest. The growl echoed in my mind, and I felt a growing sense of dread. I could hear Diego's soft breathing next to me, but I was wide awake, staring at the tent ceiling, imagining all sorts of things lurking outside. The next morning, I was exhausted but determined to shake off the fear. We packed our gear and decided to explore a new trail that led deeper into the woods. The sun was shining, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. It felt good to be outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. As we hiked, we came across signs of something large moving through the forest. Broken branches, disturbed underbrush, and even a few large footprints in the mud made my heart race. I glanced at my family, and I could see the worry in their eyes. Carlos tried to stay calm, but even he looked concerned. Sophia's anxiety was palpable, and Diego was clinging to my side, his eyes wide with fear. We reached a clearing that felt different from the others. The air was still, and the sunlight seemed to dim as we stepped into the open space. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. In the center of the clearing stood a large, ancient tree, its gnarled roots twisting out of the ground. I felt a strange energy emanating from it, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. As we approached the tree, I noticed something unusual. The ground around it was disturbed, as if something had been digging or moving through the earth. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was then that I heard it again, the deep, menacing growl echoing through the trees. It was closer this time, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We all froze, the air thick with tension. I could see the fear in my family's eyes as we stood there, unsure of what to do. The growl echoed again, and I felt a primal instinct to run. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the shadows that danced around us. Suddenly, the growl turned into a series of low, rumbling sounds, almost like a warning. The atmosphere shifted, and I could feel the weight of something watching us. I glanced at the trees surrounding the clearing, half expecting to see the Guardian del Bosque emerge from the shadows. The stories we had heard rushed back to me, and I felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Just then, the light flickered in the distance again, illuminating the clearing for a brief moment. It cast long shadows that danced across the ground, and I could see something moving in the darkness. My heart raced as I realized we were not alone. The light pulsed, drawing us in, but I felt a deep instinct to turn back. Before I could say anything, the light vanished again, leaving us in darkness. The growl returned, louder this time, and I felt a surge of panic. We turned to leave, but the path felt different. The trees seemed to close in around us, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on us. As we stumbled back toward the campsite, I could hear the rustling of leaves and the snapping of twigs. It felt like we were being followed, and I quickened my pace. Carlos and Sophia were right behind me, their faces pale with fear. I could see the campfire flickering in the distance, a beacon of safety amidst the darkness. Finally, we burst into the clearing where our campsite was set up. The fire was still burning, but it felt smaller now, almost overwhelmed by the surrounding darkness. Diego looked up, his eyes wide with concern as we rushed back to the safety of the fire. We collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. The atmosphere around the campfire felt different now. The warmth of the flames was comforting, but the fear lingered. We huddled close, sharing nervous glances as we tried to make sense of the experience. What had we seen? Was it just a trick of the light, or was there something supernatural lurking in the woods? As we sat there, the growls faded, but the sense of unease remained. The flickering light had left us shaken, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness. The night dragged on, and we tried to distract ourselves with stories and laughter, but the tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Eventually, we decided to call it a night. We crawled into our tents, but sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside made me jump, and I lay there wide awake, listening to the forest. The distant calls of animals felt menacing now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious light was still out there, waiting for us. The next morning, we packed up our campsite quickly, eager to leave the unsettling experience behind. As we drove away, I looked back at the trees, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. The woods had held secrets that night, and I knew I would never forget the mysterious light that flickered in the darkness. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about that night more and more. What had caused the light? And where had it gone? I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew there was something more to it. The experience had changed me, making me more cautious about venturing into the unknown. The encounter with the mysterious light left a mark on all of us. We became more aware of the unpredictable nature of the wilderness and the stories that can come alive in the dark. I still love camping, but I approach it with a newfound respect for the woods and the mysteries they hold. That night around the campfire taught me that sometimes the unknown is best left unexplored, and the stories we tell can have a life of their own. As I reflect on that camping trip, I can still feel the chill in the air and hear the whispers of the forest. The flickering light became a haunting memory, a reminder of the eerie and unpredictable nature of the wilderness. I learned that while the outdoors can be a place of beauty and adventure, it can also hold secrets that are best left undiscovered. Now, whenever I go camping, I can't help but glance into the darkness, half expecting to see that mysterious light flickering in the distance. The thrill of adventure is still there, but it's mixed with a healthy dose of caution. I've come to understand that the wilderness is full of surprises, and not all of them are friendly. The experience has made me more respectful of nature and the stories it holds, leaving me with a lingering sense of wonder and wariness whenever I step into the woods.